Hello, I'm Anna Delaney with ISMG. I'm very pleased to be joined by Mackenzie Jackson, security advocate at GitGuardian. Hi, Mackenzie.
Hi, it's great to be here.
So let's talk about software supply chain. How has the software supply chain risk evolved over the past few years?
It's a really challenging topic at the moment. And we can look at it from multiple different angles, but the software supply chain is certainly becoming much more complicated, much more in the cloud, and it's really shifted how adversaries target organizations. And it's changed the economics, because we have to stop thinking about these adversaries as individual people and start thinking of them more like organizations that operate on risk-reward structures that have employees. But now that we have this complex supply chain that so much is integrated into, instead of targeting a victim specifically, we can target a chink in this armor, the supply chain, and potentially get into hundreds, if not thousands, of victims. So it's changed the economics that they operate onto. It means that they can be more sophisticated in their attacks, invest more resources in it, which is much harder to defend against. And it's changed the types of ultimate victims that you have. So before, if an organization was too small, they're kind of protected a little bit by this risk reward, right? I mean, you know, the reward of the risk of attacking them is, but now we can do potentially hundreds at the same time. These different organizations now have the same risk as a large one, potentially.
Yeah, because we've seen a whole slew of attacks over the past year. LastPass, Uber, Toyota, and the attackers have managed to either publicly expose secrets or exploit them. Just talk to us more about what you're observing and the challenges that organizations are facing.
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic, this too, because when these attackers target the supply chain, you know, they're quite predictable in what they want to do, right? So when an attacker breaches into an organization, they've often found a vulnerability, a weak point, some way, you know, something in the supply chain that they're able to get into, or some other vulnerability that they've exploited. All their hopes and dreams at this point rely on that window remaining open. And they know it's not going to stay open forever. So what's the first thing that they're going to try and do? Persist their access. Try and find additional ways to remain inside these organizations' networks, so that they have much more time. And when we look at all the attacks that you kind of mentioned, a lot of them involved secrets, credentials. And that's because attackers predictably are going to get into a network or get into some kind of systems and try and find credentials to elevate their privileges, to persist their access. And so that's what we're really seeing in how a lot of these attacks are unfolding, is that, okay, you have a vulnerability in the supply chain, it's being exploited, you have hundreds, if not thousands, of potential victims. How do you persist from here? Well, let's try and find the ones that have the lowest hanging fruits, that we can persist our access, that we can move into different systems. And that's typically what we're really seeing as a big trend. And because of this, we're seeing that technical employees, like developers, are really being targeted by these attackers because they have privileged access to a lot of these different interesting resources, you know, that may contain these secrets, that may help them move into different systems.
So what's wrong with traditional tool sets? I mean, why are they not working to prevent these sort of attacks?
Yeah, the golden question, right? Security remains a very human problem. So, I mean, we're here at InfoSec Europe. You can walk into the exhibition hall and you see wonderful vendors that have wonderful tools that can help prevent all this. But perhaps we're not thinking really enough about the human element, because, you know, I talked a little bit about secrets before. Let's say that you have an amazing secrets manager, but if you're not using it correctly, if your employees aren't using it correctly, then it's not going to do its job. And I think that's a lot where we're falling down, particularly in the technology area, you know, of what we have. A lot of the security challenges that we face are potentially solved problems with the technology that we have, if it's all implemented perfectly, if we follow all the best practices all the time. But I mean, no organization is immune to a human problem, and they're never going to be. And I think it really involves a mindset shift in the tooling that we have about, okay, potentially we need to move away from this ultimate security perspective and look at more malleable types of security tools.
And following on from that, what do you think it is that enterprises are missing in terms of blind spots?
I think ultimately it's a mindset shift where a lot of security is about putting up this big strong wall, preventing attackers from getting in to your infrastructure, making sure that everything's configured perfectly. And then going back to the supply chain attacks, you can do everything perfectly as an organization, but a chink in your supply chain can cause a vulnerability that gets an attacker in there. If you've invested all your eggs into this wall security, preventing them in, what happens when they're in? I mean, what happens when they actually have broken into your systems? And this is the trouble, is that we're relying too much of keeping them out. And we're not thinking about, okay, what actually happens if they're in there? How can we contain it? How can we prevent them from moving on? How can we limit their access to what we can do? Because ultimately in a supply chain, and when you look at them, the ultimate victims in here are not the ones that have done anything wrong. They've used a reputable tool, they've used a reputable dependency, and because of a vulnerability, they're now the victims of this. So we need to stop thinking about it as, let's make sure they never get in, and let's contain them when they're in here. And I think the industry is missing that, a mindset shift to actually focus on, if we can't prevent this, we can't guarantee to prevent it, what's the next best thing? Contain it.
I think this is where Honeytokens come in. So talk to us about Honeytokens and how they can help supply chain defense.
Yeah, the Honeytokens are an amazing concept. And they're not entirely new, but they've never really been leveraged in a potential way. So when we're talking about these attackers, I said that attackers are quite predictable in their movements. They want to persist their access. So they're looking for credentials. And what a Honeytoken is a credential that will pass any sniff test. It'll be checked off as valid if they're testing them. But it's not going to provide them access to anything. And what it will do is alert you when they're in your systems. So if we go back to a lot of these attacks that we've mentioned, then a lot of the problem was that it's taken weeks and sometimes even several months before anyone's even known there was a problem, before we even knew that attackers were in all these different infrastructures. And that's the nature of supply chains. What a Honeytoken will do is it will let you know immediately when an attacker will come into your systems. And that's because we can leverage on the predictability of what they're going to try and do, persist their access. So they're going to come in, they're going to start scanning for these secrets, and just by scanning for them, just by looking for them, they're going to trigger them, and we're going to know that they're in their systems. And then we can actually start taking defensive access. And it's not going to take months, it's going to be immediate. And so that's why these Honeytokens are so powerful. We're utilizing this change in mindset. We're not trying to completely prevent them. We're not putting all of our eggs in that basket. We're saying, hey, if they all get in there, we need to know. We need to know quickly, and we need to be able to do something about it. So we can put Honeytokens and everywhere. They're a very lightweight asset. There's a honeypot as a concept that's been around in security, but it's often, an application, something heavy. Honeytokens sit there dormant, super light, so we can put them everywhere. And we can track where the attackers go. We can find information about them, what tools they're using, how they're trying to exploit us. And we can use all of that and turn the tides against them and know when our systems have been breached.
So talk to us about GitGuardian's role, helping your customers obviously implement these Honeytokens. Tell us about that relationship and what you do. Yeah, so
GitGuardian has been around for a long time, and we've been traditionally involved in detecting where these secrets are in your infrastructure. Because the problem lies is that secret sprawl is this concept that we call of when you have these secrets, these API keys, these credentials, credential pairs, security certificates, but ultimately they're meant to be stored centrally, but they sprawl everywhere. So GitGuardian has traditionally been about helping organizations identify where their secrets have sprawled to. And in that regard, we've always been on the side of, if a breach happens, we need to make sure that there's no low-hanging fruit for attackers. We need to contain them. Making sure you don't have secrets in your systems, very good way of doing that. But now we're also adding to this tool set for our customers and saying, hey, so we've been able to help you, detect these secrets. Now we're going to create some, but they're the opposite. They're going to alert you. They're going to trip up the attackers. So it's part of this process where we're kind of building out at GitGuardian, all the tools that not just help your organization build its walls, because you want to have a good, strong wall, and GitGuardian helps in that. We'll let you know if you have secrets exposed publicly in source code, but it's also about enabling you to go down this mind shift change of saying, hey, we may not be able to prevent 100% of the attacks, but let's make sure that we don't have credentials inside there. Let's make sure everything's configured properly so that we don't allow them to move between systems. And let's target and put trackers and these honey tokens so that we know, alarms, that we know once they're in. So that immediately it turns the tables, it helps us move down this mindset shift and really empower us to prevent the damage of supply chain attacks. Because we may not be able to prevent it, right? But we can prevent the damage, we can contain it. And GitGuardian is really kind of along this journey of helping that.
Well, Mackenzie, it's been brilliant talking with you. Thank you so much for your insight. It's been fascinating.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been great.
And thanks so much for watching. For ISNG, I'm Anna Delaney.